Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, and welcome to the Seven Great Men of Krynn podcast. Is a podcast like my 12 Great Men of Arda podcast, not to overuse the word. Today, as the title shows, is about Tolandruth of Juramona. Half the video can be spent on just detailing the events within Urgoth that separated Akel's era from Tol's. So here I go. In the centuries that had passed between Akel and Tol, the trouble is that Urgoth had descended into a mad civil war between the Urgot and Pakan dynasties. Or maybe I could just sum it up in a few words like that. Anyways, Tolandruth is someone who was born just simply Tol. He was named after the great general of Akel Urgot. He grew up in a remote part of the Eastern Hundred, where he grew up tending the fields of his father's farm. The peace having been disturbed in 2421, when Pakan and Akel forces fought each other in the area. Tol came across the wounded Lord Odovar, who he hid in a manure pile, as he had taken pity upon this man. Then he retrieved Odovar and led the Lord back to Juramona. And there Odovar was retrieved by his men that were led by Egrin Ramal. In the end, Tol would be recruited into this force. With the public execution of Vakazan shocking him, it's a memory that would be seared into his very soul for the remainder of his life. As to his family, they would be rescued, and his father Bakel would give permission for Tol to be accepted as a shelter or shield bearer of Egrin. In the years that followed, saw him become a respected warrior. He would accomplish several heroic deeds. He'd rescue an Irda artifact. He would challenge a tribal chieftain in battle and best the mighty chieftain, and even spare the man's life and capture him, so that Tol would become respected even by the Crown Prince Amaltar, would reward Tol for these accomplishments the rank of Rider of the Great Horde, though he was born a commoner. As to Tol's prisoner, he was to live out the rest of his days in ease and comfort. No, not really, no. Actually, he was to be executed, with Tol deciding that he should honor the man by requesting to be his executioner. He, however, freed the chieftain, who, feeling grateful, praised him and declared Tol was as his son, before he fled back to what his tribal people called the Great Green. These weren't the least of Tol's accomplishments around this time, as he'd fight against a mage warrior of sorts, Morthur, in a mighty duel. Morthur Durmount had a claim to the throne and wanted to evidently claim it, with Tol having been untouched by his magic. Lord Tumult gave Morthur's ring to Tol as a reward for his heroics. Tol would be awarded several honors, amongst them the Order of the Silver Saber, given command of the Horse Guards, and made a member of the nobility, and also a personal champion of Amaltar, with Amaltar being the crown prince, and also Tol's rival in love, as it was Amaltar who was engaged to the love of Tol's life, Valarin. Emperor Pakan III honored him as Lord Tolandruth for his many heroics. Between this and his unrequited love for Valarin, Tol would lead a rather difficult life. For a few years, he trained in the Horse Guards and trained them, in turn, in several new methods of combat. Quite a few of them would join another prince's wolves, his personal guards, or personal horde, as it was called. But the remaining Horse Guards apparently revered Tol, and in 2412 PC, pre-Cataclysm, they'd be caught up in the battles between Tarsus and Urgoth. He would be sent near the mountains near Hilo in search of the lair of a beast by the name of Simsim. The result was, however, a great number of Tol's men dying, including his close friend Narin. And then they continued to Hilo, where Tol's forces joined those of Lord Urakan. It would be his strategies that won the Battle of the Three Rose Creek over the fearsome General Tylocost. After the victory, Tol sent one of his men, Mandus, to Daltagoth to advise the Emperor and the Crown Prince of his victories over Zimzim and General Tylocost. But it wasn't until 2411 that his camped army at Hilo received a reply in the form of his retainer, Sangsa, who deserted his camp to tell Tol that Mandus had betrayed him, and instead advised the Emperor that it was Urakan who had won the victory, and that Mandus alone had defeated Ximzim. Apparently, Tal sent the wrong man. Not that Tal had much time to think about such things, as the war with the Tarsans still required his full attention. And it was for this reason that Lord Regobart arrived with his horde to assist Tolandruth in facing the Tarsans. 10 years of skirmishing and battling followed, with the war going back and forth until the Tarsans eventually declared their surrender. Tal was invited to the house of a nobleman where there was an attempt to assassinate him. He defeated the magical creatures that were supposed to be used to kill him before he returned to his forces. It was when he returned that he received word that Pakin III, Emperor of Urgoth, had died, and that most of the imperial hordes, including his, were to be recalled to the capital. This he did, and after a lengthy journey, where he paused at Thorngoth to meet with Lord Tremond, Marshal of the Coastal Hundred, who was an old comrade of his from years prior. There he informed him that he had made a deal with some pirates, and that he would like Tremond to honor the pact. This he did, with the pirates that had been defeated and spared by Tal being accepted into the Imperial Navy. He then requested one of his aides, Darpo, to remain in Thorngoth and become the admiral of the First Fleet of the Imperial Navy. This was quite the statesman maneuver, as the Imperial Navy was not exactly well put together. This left the Navy feeling loyal to him because Darpo was his man. It was in the streets of Deltagoth, though, Tal would come near to dying in a riot by a gang known as the Skylanders. He would face off against and kill the leader of this gang, and would discover that was Peladrom Tumult after he had unmasked the masked gangster, with this gangster being the son of Lord Enkian Tumult. After this event, Tal would witness a decline in Amiltar's mental capabilities as he descended into madness, and Tal would again be targeted by assassins, magical and otherwise, would escape with the aid of his wives. It's rather ironic that the Tarsans wanted him dead, and the nobility of Deltagoth also wanted him dead. Guy really couldn't catch a break. He nonetheless took part in the coronation ceremony of Amiltar, and he began a short-lived affair with the wife of Akil IV. For a time he departed and then came back. It was upon his return to Deltagoth that Tal would also find out that Akil IV had known about his affair with Valarin. He would, however, depart on another quest. A messenger arrived soon after this little meeting, one which saw the messenger inform everyone that the Red Rack had returned. This threat was apparently recognized by Tal as stemming from Mandus, and filled with rage, Tal would ride out to put an end to him. Seeing illusions of his various friends who had died, learning that this was the very spells that had been used to drive Amiltar insane, Tal reached the lair of Mandus in Mount Axis. There he confronted Mandus and was told he could save Amiltar and prevent Nazarim from sitting on the throne. However, Tal did not hesitate long with his hated enemy and killed Mandus for his crimes. The warlord then returned to Daltagoth and found that all of Mandus's predictions and illusions were true. Prince Nazarimin, who had orchestrated the fall of Amiltar alongside Mandus, had assumed the throne, with Nazarim taking Valarin with her consent as his own. He also had many of Tal's former comrades and allies killed, and Tal was tortured and left for dead outside of Daltagoth. He was joined by Mia and Kia and then left the city. Where did Tolandruth go? He was to head for the Domshu village on the outskirts of Urgoth's empire. There he stayed for half a dozen years, living peacefully with his wives. He became the most honored citizen in the village until 2395, when his old friend Egrin came to visit him to convince him to save the empire. This was to no avail, until Tal had a vision from Valarin. Thus he became determined to leave and return to the empire to rescue it from itself. And this he would do, waging a bloody civil war. This was all according to Valarin's plans, though, as it was she who had cast that illusion upon Tal, and she who had intended to ensnare him into conquering the empire for her, as she had schemed to help him seize power and then to control Tal through her feminine charms. During the civil war, though, he would send Tylocost to locate Melami Zahn, daughter of Pakin the Pretender, in order to safeguard her out of Karagoth, so that she'd be free of Akil V's clutches. In the end, the civil war got rather personal for Tal, as Tothman and the rest of the wolves were killed. Now that said, in one particular battle, his mentor Egrin would be struck during the fighting and finally die from his wounds. Tal would mourn the loss of his mentor and determined to carry on into Daltagoth alone. This way, no more of his comrades or friends would die. However, his wife Kia would insist on traveling with him, and the two entered Daltagoth alone. There, he would become determined to put an end to the unjust rule of Akal V, proceeding all the way into the palace, where he faced Valarin and her son Dalar. She told him that she had poisoned the Emperor and asked him to kill Akal V. Tal, though, remembering his honor in spite of his hatred, refused to kill a helpless man, especially in front of the man's child, no matter how much he hated him. The other guy, I mean, not the kid. And would refuse to continue along with her political ploys, though she offered to help him become emperor. He would leave, in particular, disgusted with what Valarin had become, and leaving the emperor to his fate. He returned to Kia, and the pair rode out of Daltagoth, never to return. Being tired of politics and fighting, he would return to a life of being a humble commoner. Decades later, he would meet with some of the soldiers of Pakan IV, where at the end of the book, it would be revealed that he had lived out his final days as a free man and a peaceful farmer. Valarin having been imprisoned and spent the rest of her life detailing his many deeds and heroics, generally unable to forget him and his goodness. Better late than never, I guess. Though, in this case, this video was a requested one per our polls over in the community section. The next Dragonlance video will be one about Tanis. After that, well, when we manage to meet our goal of hitting 600 subs, we'll release the next Raceland video. We're thinking of releasing Raceland videos for every goal post we hit on our way to 1,000 subs. So if you want to see that Raceland video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button like you're Huma trying to cut down Takesis.